Okay, getting ready for the STAAR. We're on TEK A.7C, which is about effects on the graph of quadratic functions. In order to do this effectively, we want to take a look at the STAAR formula chart at the vertex form, which is shown here. We can copy that onto our paper. Y is equal to A parentheses x minus h squared plus k. We know that there are three things, the A, the h, and the k, that can change how the graph looks, how it's shifted or transformed. Let's review what those three different things are. First, we can talk about the k. That's the number at the end being added or subtracted, and that makes the graph go up or down. What would make it go up? That would be if it is a positive, if it's plus something. What would make it go down or shift downward? That would make it if it is negative. The number inside of the parentheses, the h, causes us to shift left or right. And since inside the parentheses part of the equation is negative, it flips the way we normally think of things. So normally when we're moving left on our numbers, we're in the negatives, but it's opposite. So what would shift it left is if it were a plus h. And what would shift it right? Well, normally right would be in the positives, but we're going to have a negative to shift it to the left. So you just think opposite of what it normally would make it move. And then the last thing would be the A at the beginning. That can make it either wide, narrow, the parabola itself, or downward facing. So it would open downward if it were negative. Negative is what makes it downward. Narrow would be numbers greater than 1, big numbers, just bigger than 1. So 1.5 would make it narrower than 1 itself. And what would make it wider would be small numbers less than 1. So 1/2, 0.75, less than 1. We're talking positive or negative, as long as it's between positive 1 and negative 1. All right. So let's take a look. Now that we have the three ways that it can be shifted or transformed, let's take a look at what it's asking. If k of x is equal to x squared, that's the parent function, remember, parent function, which we know goes through the origin and curves up at a nice smooth parabola. So we have the parent function, and then they're saying kx plus n. So that's the number at the end. What is the value of n based on this graph? Well, we're looking. What happened? The parent function shifted downward. It didn't shift left and it didn't shift right, so it shifted down. So it moved in this direction. And how far down did it go? To -6. So what would the n have to have been? -6. That's the answer for number 14. All right, let's move to the next one. The graph of g of x is equal to x squared. We know that's the parent function going through the origin. Create a graph of h of x, so it's being transformed in some way. Negative. What did the negative at the beginning of the problem do? Negative makes it go downward. So we know it's going to be facing downward in some way. And what is this 4? It's x divided by 4. That's the same thing as 1/4 x in front of it, 1/4 x squared. So what did we say the number in front makes it do? Well, if it's small, if it's a fraction, then that makes it wider. So let's read our answer choices. It's a reflection over the x-axis. Well, this is the x-axis. It used to be facing upward, and now it's facing downward, so that is a reflection. That is correct. It is a reflection over the x-axis. And a horizontal stretch. Well, horizontal stretch means that it was pulled horizontally, sideways, which would make it wider. Does a smaller number, a fraction, make it wider? Yes. The answer was indeed F. Vertical stretch would mean it was stretched up and down, which would make it narrower. And by the way, on this question and the question above, because of the way it's given, this would be graphable. You could graph that in your calculator. You could graph the original one in the calculator. So you could do that and see the changes in it. This one, they gave you the picture of it, so there's nothing, no equation. The way they gave the equation, you couldn't graph that necessarily. Alright, let's take a look at number 4. The graph of f of x equals x squared. We know that's the parent function. It's going through the origin, nice even parabola. And then it gives us another one. It's inside the parentheses. So we remember what's happening when we are inside the parentheses. It's either going to go left or right, and it's the opposite of what we normally think. Positive not being to the right. Alright, so we are in the parentheses. It's negative 7.5, so normally on a graph we would think negative would take us this direction, but because the equation already had a negative in it, it's actually going to be taking us right 7.5. So let's look at our answer choices. Horizontal shift, that's sideways, right? Vertical is not correct, vertical is not correct. To the right 7.5 units, that is correct. This is another one, because of the way it was given to you, you could have graphed it in your calculator. Let's move to the next question. We have there again the parent function, and it's saying f of x is the parent function. So we look at the graph, that's f. So it must be that that dotted one is the parent function, f, parent function. And we see it's going through the origin, that's correct. So the f is the original. It's transformed to create the graph of h of x. H of x, and it has the 2 in front of it. Now the way that it's written, you could not graph this. You can't type that in your calculator in order to graph it. So that's why it's important for us to know, going back up to the top, it's important for us to know what the number at the front does. Well, it makes it wider, it makes it narrower, it makes it face downward. So back to the question we're on now. The number in front, it is not a fraction, it's not a small number there, it's up greater than 1, so it's going to be making it narrower. So we look at h of x, this was shifted up. If there was a number added at the end, then it would have been shifted up, well, that's a 2. If it had been plus 2, then f would have been the answer, but there's no plus 2 at the end. This one was shifted right. We know that's not happening because it would have been in the parentheses. It would have been a minus 2 inside the parentheses in order to shift it to the right. Here we see the f is here and the y is wider. It was horizontally stretched, it's wider. This 2 would be making it narrower, vertically stretched, so it's not g. Here we have the original and the new one is narrower. It's vertically stretched, taller. So J is the answer. On to the next question. We have the function p is in the form a x squared plus c. So that's still vertex form without a translation sideways, without a shift horizontally. So a parentheses x minus h squared plus c. We're just missing on this problem, there's no h, so there's no need to have the parentheses there. When there's no h, it's a x squared plus c. Same equation, so we know there's no sideways shift, and we can tell from our answer choices none of the graphs are moving left or right. So that's the explanation for that. The values of a and c are both less than 0. Well, less than 0, that's just another way of saying it's negative. And notice this is another one where the way they've asked the question, you're not able to type it in your calculator. You have to know what the formula changes will do. Well, if it's less than 0, if it's negative, so what did we say the first term? If it's negative, what does it cause to have happen? Well, it's going to be facing downward. If it's negative, so the g, which is facing upward, can't be our answer. And what did we say if c is negative? Well, this is what makes it go either up or down, and when it's negative, that means it's going down. So it was shifted down. This one is shifted upward, so it can't be f. This is shifted down. This one is not shifted either up or down, so that's not it. The answer was h. And as we move on, this question says, which statement about the relationship between the graph of f and the graph of g of x equals 7 x squared. So we see that the 7 is once again in front. Which one of them is true? We know f of x squared, that's the parent function again, parent function, and that's the one that's shown. It's on the grid, so they've graphed it through the origin. And then it says 7x squared. So what would that? This one's another one where you can graph it on your calculator. But if you know, okay, that's bigger than 1. It's a big number, bigger than 1. So we know it's going to make it narrower. And we could even make it more precise even without the calculator. If we plug a 1 in for our x, 1 squared is 1 times 7. So it would be 1 and 7. So that's how narrow it's going to be. It should still, it's a terrible curve. It should be nice and smooth, but you get the point. It is narrower, vertically stretched. All right. Quadratic functions are shown. The vertex of the graph of Q is 18 below the graph of W. Which pair could have that? So Q, 18, this is, if it's 18 below, that means on a graph it was shifted down 18. Well, we know that if it's in front of the x squared, that would make it narrower, so that's not what it's talking about. This is plus 18 at the end. We know that that was going up, and this is saying it's below, so it's not there. This is negative, so it's narrower and facing downward on the graph. This one is minus 18, so it's shifted down 18. So D would be the answer there. And that's all of the questions for transformations. Good luck.